welcome to number 27. I'm Jack, and behind me today I have two probably of the nicest V6 engines in the world. These two Alfa Romeos have what is one of Alfa Romeo's and probably one of the world's finest engines. They have the Busso V6, and there is here a really early example, one of the first Busso V6 engines, and then here one of the last ones. And the question is, which one is the definite best Busso of all? Let's pop open the bonnets and I'll tell you the differences between these two. This is one of the very first, a 2.5 V6, and this is one of the last. It's a 3 litre 24 valve. The question is, which one is the definite one to have? At the same time, we can do a little bit of a comparison between these two very different Alfa Romeos. This is a 1981 GTV6. So this is the first iteration of the Busso engine. As such, the displacement is 2.5 litres, and it only has one single overhead cam. It also has the Bosch Jetronic injection. Now, the very first example of these was actually in the Alfa 6 saloon. That had, I think, 3 Dell'Ortos, but it was really criticised because it was very unreliable. They couldn't get it to run right. This version here, with the Bosch Jetronic fuel injection, is definitely a more usable example. Whether it loses out in terms of, the noise it makes because it doesn't have the carbs, I don't actually know, but there's hardly any of the carb-fed ones around. In this trim, it puts out about 160 horsepower, and I think that many of the true sort of Alfisti say that this is the best sounding version of all Bussos. One thing you have to say is it really doesn't look like much. Now, this is much more like it, and much more like an Alfa and an Italian engine. It's so much more shouty. It looks so pretty. It's definitely much more in your face. And it has evolved quite significantly from that original 2.5. So first of all, because this is a front wheel drive car, the installation is transverse. Secondly, it's bored out to 3 litres. It has 24 valves instead of the 12 valves of the original engine, double overhead camshafts, and a more modern version of the injection system. As such, it puts out 220 horsepower, so really a good 40 horsepower at least more than the original engine. So I think there's various parameters that we have to look at in order to judge this test. There's noise, there's drivability, there's torque, and there's power. So let's take them out and see what they're like. So the GTV6 was one of the sort of Alfas from the late 70s when Alfa was trying to sort of move on to produce more cars and become a little bit more of a proper volume manufacturer. It is based on the Alfetta chassis. It's a very good chassis, and it has a transaxle gearbox as well. So Alfa's engineers at the time actually concentrated on trying to get perfect weight distribution between front and back. They are supposed to be very, very neutral handling cars. I will talk a bit about how this actually drives as well as the engine, but we're going to concentrate a little bit on the fabulous Busso. So I myself have had a Busso. I had an Alfa GTA, and it was absolutely magical. It's definitely the best V6 that I've ever driven. It was incredible. It was revvy. It sounded bombastic. It was crisp. It was lightning quick in throttle response. It was torquey. It was an engine that had absolutely everything. For a 3.2 V6, it only put out 240, 250 horsepower. So by the standards of modern engines, obviously the Busso was a little bit lacking in that last evolution. But it was one of the best engines I have ever driven. I adored it. So, how about this, the very first version of the Busso? Now, I said initially that this car had an advantage because it has a delete on the centre box, and then it has a sports rear exhaust. But I've just been told by the owner that in actual fact they are exactly the same, because the 916 also has a delete in the centre box and a sports rear exhaust. So they are pretty evenly matched. Now on startup, immediately, this feels like quite an organic lump. I don't know how to describe it, but You know, it feels like it's alive. Most of the modern engines, I don't know what it is about it, but they are so sort of linear and perfect in the way they sound and the way they move that they don't sound like they're alive. This, even though it has fuel injection, it still has some of that old style feel. So let's do a little pull and see how it feels first of all in terms of speed. So if we start at it's about 25 miles an hour, 2,500 revs, foot to the floor, responds cleanly, builds nicely to 4, 4.5, 5, really picks up pace, 6. So extremely linear. From what I can see, the red line looks like it's, I think, 6.5. This is somebody else's car, so I'm not going to go above 6 really, but it feels quite long geared as well, so definitely doesn't feel desperately quick. Now these GTVs weighed 1,250 kilos, which for the time was actually a little bit porky for the sort of late 70s, so they weren't light cars. Of course, by modern standards they are, but maybe the weight's sort of dulling the performance a little bit. 160 horsepower, but the engine has so much personality, it feels so nice. Now the seating position is a little bit odd. I've had a lot worse, but I'm not finding it so much sort of short leg, long arm, although it is a little bit, but I don't mind it. It's more just that the steering wheel is sort of tilted bus-like, which makes it quite odd to sort of throw around. It's quite a sort of it's quite a squidgy car. It has a bit of initial roll, but then it seems to sort of settle into that, which is quite nice, because it feels like the car is working with you when you're going down the road. It's not just sort of doing everything automatically, so I quite like that. Now let's do a little pull through the gears. Oh wow, love that. So it does go all the way, well, I did take it all the way to 6.5 because it just felt very happy doing that. It's really smooth, and it's just, it's so linear, it's unbelievable. There's just no spikes in power. It just builds and builds and builds. It's very smooth, fantastic engine, and it does sound incredible. It sounds very, very good. Now, I have a camera at the back, so I hope it's picking up the exhaust sounds, but the gearbox is not great, and I think that's known because it's transaxle, the links, and I think its cables are really long. And that is certainly not the best sort of feature of this car. You kind of get used to it after a while, but it is vague, it is long, and it doesn't really quite fit in the character of what a sports car should be. The Busso has always had a following and has been appreciated. Alfas of this era, it was a bit of a different matter. They were in the doldrums for a long time. They had a bad reputation for rust, for build quality, and all sorts of stuff. Now, in terms of build, it isn't obviously to the standard of the German cars, but they're not. I mean, they're not that bad. I don't think. I feel like this isn't. It's quite a nice cabin. It's certainly individual and quite different. Nowadays, in any case, the whole thing has changed, and these GTVs in particular, I was talking to the owner, and they really are going for quite decent money. I thought they were still around the sort of, I know they used to be around £5,000-10,000. I thought they were around the 15-20, but apparently they're even higher than that. So they are going for good money, and I think that's kind of deserved. The handling, the steering is just lovely. It's got that sort of oiled feel that some of these systems have from back in the day, and you get so much feel from the front and the back of the car. It really is quite sort of docile in the corners. It gives you quite a lot of confidence. You have to drive it. It's not a car that drives itself. But it is a lovely, lovely thing. But let's take out the 916 and see what one of the latest sort of Bussos is like and how it compares to this one. sort of switch it on, it immediately feels a bit more sanitized and just a little bit kind of tamer, because, well, I don't know what they've done to change the way it feels so much. I guess it's a little bit more isolated in the engine bay. There's less noise deadening. It's one of the things about these 916s. I had one myself. I had the 2 litre. That you notice straight away is they are so weird in terms of seating positions, because you're basically perched up quite high, but the roof of the car comes in quite low. So you've got, you know, it's a kind of like a bit of a letterbox view of the road, which is odd. I mean, I really like these. I loved mine. I thought it was a bargain. They are still bargains, I think, for what they are. But the driving position itself and the way that your legs and the steering wheel's a bit too far off. It is adjustable, but I think not for reach. I think only in terms of moving it up and down. So, the 3 litre. Let's see how it pulls. Now, in this clip, it definitely doesn't sound as good as the previous Busso, but I have to say a lot of that is to do with camera placement and just the aerodynamics of the car, and that it's picking up more road noise. So this revs to 7, so it revs a little bit higher. You can definitely feel a little bit of a similarity between the two, like an organic feeling, the mechanical noise that comes from it. But this does feel very different. It's sort of happier to rev. You can feel there's more power. Now these weighed, I think, 1,450 kilos, so a couple of 100 kilos more than the other one. So the extra performance should be blunted, but it definitely feels quite a bit quicker. The steering is super sharp, super responsive, but after having been in the previous GTV6, it's definitely artificial, it's overly light. It's still fun, but you know, you can't replicate that old style sort of feel. You just can't with these more modern systems. This is much more, you know, it's much more akin to like a sort of the PlayStation type stuff. It feels less real. So the ride on this is much more sort of jittery. It is a bit of a stiffer car, and in corners it doesn't sort of pitch and wallow about quite as much, but it definitely feels much more artificial. It doesn't feel like the whole car is working in harmony, whereas with the GTV6 it really does. You can sort of feel both ends of the car. This is so front-endy. It's all about the front end. The steering is so quick, off the mark, off centre. It's got quite a bit of weight on the front, which you can feel. The back end just feels like it's there but not doing anything. In the other car, it was so much more balanced. You could definitely feel that. So if we're talking about the engine again, I'm just going to lower the window and see. Again, I've got a camera at the back, and I'm hoping that we can pick up as much exhaust noise as possible, but you can never tell until afterwards whether the camera for the exhaust is going to pick up or not. But second gear, 30 miles an hour. Foot down, responds quicker. Very nice, very, very nice. Again, super responsive to the throttle, very creamy. These engines are just fantastic. They may not be the out and out power kings for their displacement, but they are very nice. This feels quite similar to what I had in my GTA, in terms of the way it responds, the torque, the way it revs. But obviously the one in my GTA had quite a few mods to it, and this definitely can't quite compete. It doesn't have the top end rush. It's again very, very linear. I would say it builds a bit more than the 2.5. So as it revs up, the power definitely increases a bit more markedly. There's no big steps. But that 2.5 is so linear. In a way, it kind of takes a little bit out of it in that way. But then if you're driving it hard, it's so predictable that obviously it makes for a great drive. We will just turn around now and do another sort of pull through the gears. just amazing engines. There's nothing quite like them. They're so willing, kind of, it feels like it's working with you. It wants to do it. Just brilliant. Now the gearbox on this, first of all, it's got this aftermarket, both the handbrake and the gear lever have these aftermarket sort of tops, which are definitely not to my taste. And there's a little bit of slop in there, so I think that the bushers probably need to be changed. It is, again, not one of the world's sort of greatest gearboxes. It's long throw, they're vague even when you do change the bushers, so they're not brilliant, but you know, they do the job okay, but it's not, I guess it doesn't really matter when you have an engine like this. And these 916s are still a lot of fun to throw around. My 2 litre, I think, was a little bit more agile, and it felt like a little bit less affected. A little bit less sort of front end heavy than this. But it's still a great car, and I think when you're sort of totting up between the two, the advantage of having a slightly sharper handling one of these to having this engine, well, I don't know. You know, the 2 litre, the 4 cylinders, was still one of the best 4 cylinders out there, so it's a great engine, but obviously can't quite match the Busso in terms of personality. This GTV is possibly for sale. The owner's thinking of passing it on because he doesn't use it very much. It's a great looking example. It's all, apart from the gear lever and the sort of handbrake bits, which I think are very easily sorted. It looks lovely, looks very clean. I haven't sort of gone underneath or anything, but it looks like a really good car. I think it's quite low mileage. I think it says it's 50,000 miles on the clock. So anyway, he's thinking of selling it. If you're interested, I'm going to put the link to his Instagram in the video description, and you can message him on Instagram. What a lovely thing, and it's still a lot of fun. It's so different from the earlier car in feel, but you can still chuck it down the road and it puts a smile on your face. They're great things, these, not that expensive either for what they are. So the question though that ultimately we have to answer is, which version of the Busso should you get? And I think that they are just both absolutely awesome. I think the earlier version of the Busso, some people say it sounds better. I don't know if I agree. One thing that I would say, it definitely sounds more alive. So when you start it up at lower revs, you can definitely feels like you've got something which is alive in front of you. Whereas this, it's a bit more sanitized. It's a bit more regular, everything about it. I don't know how to explain it, but this feels definitely more like a mass-produced engine, and I know the original one was as well, but the original one feels a little bit more special, I think, in normal sort of driving conditions, but the way this revs and pulls is also really addictive. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please do subscribe. And if you've got an interesting car or an angle or something that you want me to do, get in touch with me on Instagram. That is absolutely the best way.